So just a few notes before we get to timers. Now the code will look a bit different here, and that's just because this here is kind of a separate example. Okay, so if I look at the overloads for this, in the formal parameters, we have a uClass and then an fTransform. So in this case, that is what we use. I go and declare an fTransform called spawnLocation, and I pass that in as an argument. Then in the second overload, you can see we have once again the uClass, but in this case we have an fVector for location and also an fRotator for rotation. So again, it's important to look at the various overloads that you have. Maybe look at the documentation. If the helper, so IntelliSense, kind of acts up, sometimes again it takes some time to catch up, right? This is very handy. There's lots of situations where you'll find one or the other overload handy. So just a quick note on that. It's not just the fTransform, you can also use it with an fRotator and an fVector. But I purposely showed you the fTransform because we have not talked about that yet. Prior to that video, that is. So you might notice compared to some of the previous videos that the IntelliSense, so this parameter or overload information, the font is a bit larger, and that's very useful. So in the next section, I'm going to show you how I can go about changing the font for both the tooltips basically, so for parameter information, constructors and so on, and also for code completion. So we have two settings, one for code completion, such as here. So I'll just place the caret right after that dot, press and hold Control and then tap J, and then we get this list. Then you can see we have all of these things, toString and so on. Then also for method and parameter information, you can do Control Shift and spacebar, and then you get this, for example. Or if I left click and hover over here, you can see information about this thing. Same thing with UE log and so on. We can change the font that shows up by going to Tools, Options, then under Environment, so expand Environment, then go to Fonts and Colors, and then you have the section Statement Completion. Once again, this is useful for code completion, and then you can just change the size. I think this was set to 9, which is very small. Okay, so I'll set that to 12 and then I'll click OK here. And then also again under Tools, Options. Okay, so I set that to 12 under Statement Completion. Then you have under Editor Tooltip. This once again will be useful for parameter information, so showing the overloads, the constructors and stuff like that. I've also set this to 12. If I remember correctly, this was set to 9 by default. Now I did not change this mainly because if I just click OK here and I go and do Control Shift Spacebar, this box can kind of get a bit big, where this box would stretch like all the way to the left and stuff like that. So I had kind of issues with that in testing, and I found a good balance here is around 12. So I hope this is much easier for you to read. And at the same time, I hope it won't give me too many issues, like when I'm zoomed in so that it does not get cut off or something like that. And I think I prefer this size for myself as well. So that's why I'm showing you this. Maybe the default size is a bit too small for your taste, and you can change it in this way. Again, this is under Tools, Options, and you have Statement Completion for the code completion pop-ups that you get, and then Editor Tooltips for parameter information and so forth. And again, basically all I changed, I did not change the font or anything like that, I just changed the size. Okay, so I hope this was useful to you, and I'll see you in the next section. So in this example, we can see that this spawn actor will return the type that we specify, so in this case, a chair. If I go and change this, let's say to something like a actor, once again, if I hover over here, this will now return a actor, because that is the type that we specified. And you'll also notice that this returns a pointer. It has that asterisk again. So what this means is we can declare a variable of that type, so either a actor or in this case a chair, and set that to whatever this function here will return. Okay, so I'm back in the myGameModeBase.cpp. And so from the previous example, the takeaway really is that we can get a reference to the actor that we spawn using this spawnActor function. Okay, so I'll go to the myGameModeBase.h, so the header file. I'll just go ahead and create a private section. I'm going to create this variable here, spawned chair reference. It is of type HChair and it's also a pointer. I'll go back to the .cpp file in just a second. What I want to do now is I want to start defining some of the things that we'll use in the discussion on timers. Now, one of those things will be the timer handle. And this basically creates a unique timer handle. And the reason why we need that is we are going to set the timer, or we're going to clear the timer, and so on. And each time we do that, we're going to pass that our timer handle. So in this case, I call that the destroy timer. And that again is of type fTimer handle. Next, I want to create a function that we are going to use when we call the set timer. And basically what's going to happen is once that timer runs out, so let's say 5 seconds, once that 5 seconds runs out, then it's going to call a function on a particular object, and we also need to specify which object and which function it is then going to call, again when that time runs out. So I'm going to declare a function for that purpose here. I'm not going to specify it as being a U function or anything like that. I'll just call this function invoke destroy, and that's exactly what it's going to do. It's going to invoke the destroy function, and it's going to invoke that on our chair in this particular example. So it's just a simple void function. I'm going to right click, quick actions, and I'm going to click create definition of that invoke destroy. In my gameodebase.cpp, of course, you can go and type that stuff out. I'll go to that. It creates that function for us. Okay, we'll get back to that here in just a second. So I created this handle here, so HChair spawned chair reference. So I'll just copy that, and this here where we call spawn actor will return a reference to the actor that we spawn. So I'm just going to set this actor variable pointer to whatever this will return, right? So we now have a reference to that actor that we have spawned in our world. So just a quick few demonstrations before we actually do the next step. So I'd like to talk about set timer function. And we basically have two ways of getting to that, to set that timer. So firstly, we can do get world. We've seen this previously, get world, where we did the spawn actor. And here we actually created a variable of type uworld. And again, we do get world right here. So up here we do get world, and then we can do get timer manager, and that is going to return the timer manager instance for this world. You can also do get world timer manager, and that is going to get the timer instance from this actor's world. So this is a nice, shorter way of doing it, but basically both of them work. So up here again you do get world, from that you do get timer manager, and then you do set timer. Here you just do get world timer manager, and then you do dot set timer. Both of these will return something called fTimer manager. So you can see if I hover over here, if I hover up here, you can see fTimer manager as well. So what does that do? Let's create that, hover over that. This is a class to globally manage timers. Okay, so that is simply what it does. So you might have already thought about this here. This get world, and you remember we created this myworld variable. So what you can do is again get timer manager from that. If the actor is not actually spawned in a level, again this is going to return null, right? So if this is not null, then we use it, we get the timer manager, and then we set the timer. So I would probably do it in this way. I mean, you probably don't always have to go and check and recheck stuff, but it might be a good idea, especially with pointers. Go and remove this. Doesn't really matter which one you go with right here. I just want to demonstrate how you would use the set timer now. So if you have problems with the getWorld timer manager, which again will return an F timer manager, then you might have to go and try some includes. So you can try this include, right? This include right here. And you can go and look at the functions that it has, some of the overloads. Once again, I'll link you to many of the documentation pages for reference. If we look at some of the overloads for this setTimer function, then you will see it takes in that ftimer handle. So in our case, we have that destroy timer. Okay, again, you can go back and forth using the arrow keys. So with overload 6, we can see a few comments here. So this in object, so user class, like what is that? Well, basically this is the object to call the timer function on. Another useful comment here is, so this function is going to set a timer to call the given native function at a set interval. If a timer is already set for this handle, it will replace the current timer. So just keep that in mind as well. So getting back to this in object, again the object to call the timer function on, well, we want to call it on this object. Okay, so this next thing you can see is this t-base delegate, this long thing. This is not very useful. It's kind of weird, especially if you are new to programming, like what the hell is this, right? Then you have this comment, in timer method to call when the timer fires. So basically what we are going to do is we are going to give this a reference to the function that we want to call. And finally we'll go and give that the time, so how long this will actually run before we call the function. Okay, so now we'll actually write this code. So again, in mygameworld base.cpp. So I have a reference here, we have getWorld, we have this myWorld variable, we have that spawned actor, and we have a reference to that spawned actor. And of course, we have this handle, destroy timer. We are going to call that on this object. Then we need this here, so we're going to call a function on this class, a mygameMode-base, and the function's name is invoke_destroy. Now I would like to note that you'll write it out just like this. You will not add the parentheses right at the end. So basically all you need is the handle. And that might kind of seem weird, right? But in this case, we don't need to pass any arguments or anything like that. It simply needs a reference, and that handle is again invoke_destroy in this case. And I'll set that to 5 seconds right at the end. So we set the timer. We have this unique timer handle called destroy timer. Once we play the game, we'll have an instance of mygameMode-base, which will of course spawn or be instantiated. So on that object, so in other words on this object, we are going to call this function here. So this is a reference because it's basically a pointer. And again, how do you initialize a pointer? With an address. So we pass it the address using this here, the reference to the function name, invoke_destroy, and we set the timer to 5 seconds. So after 5 seconds, again, it's going to call this function here. Now we need to actually do something in this function. And so what are we going to do? Well, we have a reference to the actor that we spawn, in this case, spawned chair reference. What do? I do the destroy function, okay, as the name of that function suggests. So that should do it. I'll just build again and make sure we don't get any errors. Okay, so after building, you will see that you don't have any errors in the output. Now, one thing before we actually run this in the editor is I'll go to the chair.cpp and make sure to remove the set lifespan. That is set to 10 seconds. We don't want kind of duplicate functionality on this. So this is set to 5 seconds in the timer. and that is going to destroy that actor after 5 seconds. So we want to make sure that it uses, this functionality. Okay, so with that out of the way, I'll Control F5 to do a final build and run in this case. So that will now build, and it'll also open up Unreal Editor. Okay, with that complete, I'll click play. We immediately spawn that chair. You'll see that'll get destroyed. So it spawns, you can see it's in the world outliner, and after about 5 seconds again, that'll get removed or destroyed. And that is thanks to this very handy timer functionality. Of course, there's a lot that you can do with it. This is just a basic demonstration here, using functionality that we've already discussed so far in this course. Okay, next, as an exercise, what I'd like you to try and do is, at the moment, if we click play, right, the actor spawns immediately. So our chair spawns immediately, it does that add impulse, and after a few seconds again, it'll get destroyed. So it would be nice if the actor would spawn like maybe after a second or two after we click play, instead of immediately. And you might have to go and move a few things around, of course. So go ahead and try this. Again, go and write a timer function. Let's say spawn chair. That'll get called after some time, let's say a second or 2 seconds after begin play. So of course this means that we are going to set that timer in the begin play function. So once you click play, begin play will be called, and after 2 seconds that function will get called, which will spawn our actor. And all of the code that we currently have in begin play, a lot of that you'll go and put in that new function. See how you get on, and then when we come back, I'll show you how I went about doing this. So to solve this challenge here, I'll go and create another ftimer handle. And I'll call that spawn timer. And now we need to create the function that will be called once the timer runs out. I'll just go right click on that spawn chair function, quick actions and refactoring, and I'll create the definition of that in my game mode base.cpp. And go to that. Okay, so all I'm going to do is I'm basically going to cut these lines of code out and paste it in this new function, spawn chair. So instead of doing all of this again, all I'm going to do in begin play is the get world timer manager, set timer, and of course we want to pass it our spawn timer. I pass it the function that I wanted to call once the timer runs out, so that is spawn chair. Let's say after 2 seconds. Okay, now I'd like to note here that you have another bool here called loop. You can see if you do a comma here, this is set to false by default. So in other words, if you want to call that function repeatedly, but in this case we don't want to do it, we want this to be a once-off thing. So after a set timer, call that function one time, right? We want to spawn a single chair. Then once again, if you do another comma, you can see this in first delay. And as you can see once again in the comment here, it says the time in seconds for the first iteration of a looping timer. Now in this case, we are not going to loop it. So I'm just going to remove it. Alright, so that is basically what I want to do in begin play. I set that timer, the spawn timer. It'll call the spawn chair function after 2 seconds. Now I would like to mention here that this is done in the game mode, but I probably will not do this in this kind of code in the game mode. I would probably do this in the level script actor instead, but I don't want to go back. Right, we started with the level script actor, so I'm just going to stick with the game mode for this demonstration. But again, this is probably functionality that you'd write in the level script instead. Okay, so on begin play, I set that timer. After that timer elapses, I'm going to spawn the chair, call the spawn chair function, which will spawn our chair in this location. And this is where we get a reference to that spawned actor. Then we do the same thing here. We do get timer manager, set timer, destroy timer, on that instantiated object, we call the invoke destroy, which is going to destroy that actor. And we do that after 5 seconds. So I'll bold that and I'll open up the editor. And if I click play now, it takes 2 seconds before that chair spawns. And then it gets destroyed as well after 5 seconds. Now, as I mentioned before I actually close this lesson off, so I have this set timer here, and we are going to call after 2 seconds this function spawn chair, right? So let's say you want to repeat this. So after every 2 seconds, you want to call that function again, then you can do true. And you can also go and set that first delay, which if you look at the 6th overload here, gives you some more information, the time in seconds for the first iteration of a looping timer. So I mean, you can just set that to 1.0 f for, that is a float. So the first chair will spawn after 1 second, and then every 2 seconds after that you'll get another spawn. Now, as we have it right now, this is not going to give us the results that we expect, because it's not going to actually delete, it's not going to call this function. Every time it calls the spawn chair, it's going to set the destroy timer again. So basically each time it sets this timer, again if you do Ctrl spacebar, if the timer is already set for this handle, it will replace the current timer. And this is a global thing. Okay, so every time we call this spawn chair function, we set the destroy timer, and so it's never actually going to call this function, okay, because this is set to 5 seconds. But if I go and build and run this, you'll see what I mean. Okay, so that has compiled, and if I click play now, after a second your first chair should spawn, and then it'll keep spawning chairs, but you'll see it won't delete after 5 seconds, as you might expect. Those chairs will just keep piling up. So what we can do is maybe change this here to 3. So it'll call that invoke destroy after 3 seconds. And maybe we'll spawn every 4 seconds instead. And I'll just remove that final one, in which case it will now actually use this value that we've set here. So it won't have a different initial value. So again, after 4 seconds, it's going to call the spawn chair. It is looping. That is what this true is for once again. So it's going to loop and call this function repeatedly, basically, after it starts. And then each time it's going to call spawn chair, and we're going to set the timer, the destroy timer. Let's just see if this works. I'll just Ctrl B to build that. Okay, hard reload complete. So if I click play now, after 4 seconds, your chair will spawn. It'll get cleaned up, it'll spawn another one, it'll clean that one up, and so forth. So now we are looping that functionality. Another thing you can do is just to remove this. So it's going to spawn the chair, but it's never going to go and call this a destroy function using that timer. And then you can go and reset this to what we had it before. In the chair we have fish call down. In the chair.cpp, in the begin play we have set lifespan, and begin play is called when the game starts or when the actor is spawned. So remember that. I'll set the lifespan to 10 seconds, and that is about it. We can now pull that and go back. Okay, hot reload complete, so I'll click play again. It will now start spawning chairs, and after about 10 seconds it should clean the individual chairs up one by one. So there's that first one. You can see they'll get destroyed after some time. So how is this useful? Well, let's say you build a game where you throw grenades and things like that. You want it to explode, get destroyed, and maybe do particle effects and such after, let's say, 5 seconds. Then you can start to see what your options are. It's also useful for cleaning up actors, so after you spawned it, you don't want your world to populate with too many actors. They might go off screen after some time and so forth. So you want to start cleaning things up. So once again, I'm just providing you with the options that are available. Alright, so I'll stop that. And I'll go back to Visual Studio here and the mygameoutbase.cpp to this line right here. Now from the getTimerManager, that once again will return this fTimerManager and Control J here. From here, what we can do is we can clear a timer. So you can see right in the helper to the left, you are going to pass it a timer that you want to clear. It clears a previously set timer. Then you can do is timer active, is timer paused, and so on. Once again, with, let's say, is timer active, it's going to return a bool and you simply pass it the handle once again. So once again, I'm not going to demonstrate every single thing here. It might take very long to do that. And even this final section is just kind of a bonus just to have some fun with this. So you can see what your options are and how you can combine it, right? And also we have not really talked about at this point the fact that begin play calls when the actor is spawned also. So I thought that this was a nice bonus section to add. But as you can see, you have many options and you really can do a lot with the timer. You can now really start to have fun combining things like spawning, destroying, and so forth. And this is the type of functionality that you'll be applying in many different situations in all of your projects pretty much. So once again, I hope you find this section useful and I'll see you in the next lecture.